Welcome all again to our course, and this time to the third and last lecture about our first topic, which is still XML. So in this lecture, we are just gonna see two more examples, adding to the examples we've shown last lecture about the node context or XMLs and XSDs. And this time, we're gonna show you two more examples. One is about the animal group, which is kind of a silly example, but just for completing the explanation we've done at the first theory lecture. And next, we're gonna see a much more interesting example, which represents instances of a patient health report, or at least part of it. First, let's see again the example about the animal group. So open up your Eclipse. The XSD for the animal group we're gonna use is this one. I've already created as in the last examples. And again, we've not seen almost anything about XSDs, only the fact that they have a target namespace, and that namespace, along with its file name, must be used if any XML is to refer to this XSD in order to use its elements and attributes and data types, and also to validate against it. The second topic of our course will be XSD, so we'll see every aspect of the theory about XSDs, and also all these examples, in our case, the XSDs about the XMLs we've already shown you. So have a little bit more patience if you're curious about how to create XSDs. And for now, just have in mind the target namespace and the file name of the XSD, which are the two things necessary for referring to it from any XML that is to be validated against it. So now let's create our first XML animal group file. As we've shown before, click the right button, New, Other, XML file. The name we will use will be animal group 1. Click Next. Select the option in the middle, Create XML file from an XML schema file. Select the XSD we're gonna refer in our example. Click Next. Finish. Let's maximize it. So here it is, our animal group XML template, automatically generated by Eclipse. But let's change, as always, some things here. Okay, now it's according to our custom pattern we are using since the first example. And in this example, you can see that similarly to the other examples we've seen so far, in which we refer to a XSD, we define a default namespace from W3C XML schema instance namespace. Associate that namespace with an XSI prefix in order to use that XSI to access the schema location attribute whose value will be set as the target namespace of the animal group XSD, to which all the elements and attributes we're going to use at this XML is associated, and also with the XSD animal group file. And other than this default namespace from W3C, we also gotta create a custom namespace of our own, setting the prefix with any name we want, in this case Daniel PM 1982 as always, and a value for the namespace exactly the same as the target namespace from the XSD, which we are referring the XML to. And then we can use the custom prefix, the new PM1982, to have access to any attributes or elements. First, the group ID, we can use a value of 1, and we can use the inner elements inside the root element, animal group element, which are any of the 3 defined at the XSD. We have the choices cat, dog, or rabbit. Let's define first a sample dog here. As an attribute, let's use 1 for the animal ID of the dog. And inside dog, as inside any other animal we use here, we can use the other inner elements describing the animal, which are the name, the birth date, the color, the owner, and the species. So these are the inner elements for dog as well as for the other 2 options of animals. I've used the same inner elements for any of these animal types or elements, but of course you could use different elements for each one. But for simplicity, I've reused the same elements for all 3 of them. Don't forget to use the prefix both for any attribute you use as well as for the elements. If you don't use the custom prefix of the custom namespace that is the same as the target namespace from the XSD, the XML or any application that makes use of it will not recognize that attribute as part of that target namespace or from the XSD. So you gotta always use the prefix both for the attributes as well as for the elements, except in the case if the custom namespace had been declared as default without any prefix, which is not our case. For a dog example, we're done. Let's declare only 2 more animals, which will be a cat Okay, for that is the same. And now let's just, for showing you the three options, let's declare a rabbit. The same way we've done the others. Okay, when we analyze the XSD, you'll see that we can use any number of the same elements. So just for showing you, let's declare another rabbit and just change the values here. Okay, we could create another XML, but I don't think we need. It will be exactly the same as this one. And for testing, it's always the same. If there's no Eclipse error message, that means that the XML is well formed. And for checking if it validates against the XSD, just press the right button and validate. Okay, the validation completed with no errors or warnings. So that's it for our animal group example. Okay, now our last example about this topic of XML will be a pretty much similar XML that will validate against an XSD, but in a more realistic context, which will be a health record. And in this specific case, about part of that health record, which will be some files, some patient files about clinical pharmaceutical promptwares or records. So we'll have the XSD file, consultation record. Let's maximize it here, which will specify every element and attribute necessary for the patient record to use, but you'll not analyze the XSD for now. You just take a look at the target namespace that we're gonna use along with the XSD file name for referring the XML files to this namespace. So we have the XSD, and for each patient we're gonna have a XSD instance or XML instance document that will refer to this XSD document, but only for a specific patient. So let's create one simple XML. New other XML file. The name will be consultation record 1. In the schema, we're going to relate it will be consultation record.xsd. Finish. Maximize it. Okay, here is the automatic generated template with simple values, and let's just organize things to keep our pattern as in the other examples. Okay, now it's correct. And let's analyze first the namespaces and prefix we are defining here, which is, as always, the default XML schema instance from W3C associated to the XSI prefix. You could use another prefix here, but as default it is set as XSI. And through that default prefix XSI, you access the schema location attribute and define the value using the target namespace defined at the XSD along with the XSD file name. And for getting access to that target namespace, we create a custom namespace with a custom prefix, in our case Daniel PM 1982, and set as the URI value exactly the same name as the target namespace as we've done on the other examples so far. So through that custom prefix Daniel PM 1982 using a column, we have access to all the elements and attributes from that namespace of the XSD. And first, as we are inside the consultation opening tag still, let's define the consultation record ID, which is the number of the patient record. Let's use just a simple number here. And next, let's analyze each section of this XML document instance. So we have 3 sections for these XMLs of a patient record, which are the patient information with the patient element. Then we have the information about the clinician, which in our examples will be a clinical pharmacist. And we have the last section of the record, which is the consultation specific info. So let's see the patient section. We have a attribute patient ID, which is the ID of the patient on the system. Let's put it as something like this. Then we have the name of the patient, for example, patient A or something else. We have the gender, male or female. In this case, let's use male. The birth date, that's a date value. And the address. And that's it for the patient info. Let's just adjust here the indentation. Okay, now. So that's it for the patient section. Now let's go to the clinician section. The clinician ID on the system, the national professional number that identifies that professional as a health provider at the country. Let's use something like this. The profession, which at the XSD, when we analyze, you'll see that it's a enumeration. So we have the options here. It could be a dentistry doctor, a nutritionist doctor, a pharmacist doctor, a physician, a physiotherapist, or a psychologist doctor. Let's use a pharmacist doctor. The name of the professional, pharmacist ABC, or anything you want. And the gender, let's leave it as mail. So that's it for the clinician. And now about the specific info of the consultation itself. The date, time, the diagnosis that that professional has achieved through his analysis. In this case, the pharmaceutical diagnosis. For example, he might have found that the patient has a general wrong diagnosis. Let's just use some general diagnosis and interventions here. Intervention is the other element we are using. Another diagnosis that the clinical pharmacist has reached is that the patient is on the wrong pharmaceutical treatment. Some misdiagnosed conditions for which no treatment has been implemented. Some medication prescribed inappropriately for particular conditions. Inappropriate doses, dosage form, schedule, route of administration, or method of administration. These are only general categories of clinical pharmaceutical diagnosis about problems related to drugs when analyzing a patient pharmacotherapy. Of course, in a real context, there would be the specification exactly about the problem, about which drugs or exactly which problems are being diagnosed. But we're just using some examples here of categories of pharmaceutical diagnosis and next about pharmaceutical interventions. Also at the diagnosis, actual and potential adverse drug events, still at the diagnosis, problems arising from the financial impact of therapy, lacking of understanding of the medications by the patient, missing pharmaceutical clinical pathology lab exams, That's it for the diagnosis. And still at the consultation element nested to it, the last element, which is the intervention or interventions based on the pharmaceutical diagnosis that the clinical pharmacist has discovered. So the first intervention as a very general example, a full pharmaceutical clinic pathology lab exams solicited and analyzed by the pathology pharmacist and by the clinical pharmacist. The next intervention is a new diagnosis consensus reached along with the clinical care team, including all the pharmacists that have participated in the care and support of the patient, and all other clinicians, the physician, the nurses, etc. Another intervention, new pharmacotherapy plan instituted and prescribed by the clinical pharmacist specialist in new protocols and patient diagnosis criteria or categories adopted for that specific patient whose diagnosis has been redefined. Another intervention is that all drug-related problems regarding indication, missing drugs, and posology have been corrected. Another intervention, drug events managed and interactions resolved. Another general intervention, financial problems resolved with costs reduced by 50%. Another intervention, patient reoriented about all his disease or conditions, about correct care management and pharmaceutical issues related to drugs, efficacy and security. Another intervention, continuous clinical pharmaceutical consultations established. Another intervention, all team clinicians notified and rescheduled for the respective reconsultations. And the last intervention, clinical pharmaceutical consultation documented and registered at the patient health record. So that's it for our example. Of course, these are very general diagnoses and interventions about what is supposed to happen in a clinical consultation with a clinical pharmacist. And of course, in a real example, there will be a lot of details about the patient conditions, about his exams and clinical data, as well as about the drugs, the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of these drugs, and all the interactions between them and between the drugs and the patient, and of course about the specifics of each intervention. These are just general categories based on clinical pharmacy consensus or clinical guidelines. But the thing here is, as with the other examples, for you to see that we're creating a real context XML file that could represent a real consultation for a patient A with all the data about this patient, about the clinician, that in this case is a clinical pharmacist, that could be any other professional, each within their privative and demanded clinical competences or in clinical specialized care, and also about the consultation itself, starting with the date, time for the consultation, then with the diagnosis resulted from the analysis of that clinical professional about the patient, about his pharmacotherapy, his clinical data, and about the clinical protocols that should be followed by all professionals, as well as with the interventions made, in this case by the clinical pharmacist, to correct or to resolve all the issues detected for that patient. So for each patient, or even for the same patient, we could do on each consultation a new XML record that, together with many others, would consist in that patient health record or part of this health record, which would be the pharmaceutical record. And that could be used for any clinician consultation, for physicians, for nurses, for psychology doctors, for physiotherapists, for nutritionists, for dentistry doctors, or any other doctor, in order to record the consultation, each consultation of each of these clinicians with a certain patient to be added to his promptuary or to his health record. So these are the examples. There's nothing more that I could add about XML itself, at least that I am aware about. And I'll also put some examples as free examples that come with Eclipse about XML and XSD, and you may look at those other examples if you wish to see more real context as examples in which we could use XML and XSD technologies and also WSDL technology to represent the data, its structure, and the data types at the XSD, and referring to the XSD from the XML files, which would contain the information itself structured by those elements, attributes, and data types from the XSD. So that's it for this XML topic. And next topic, we'll focus on XML schema documents or XSDs, and we'll finally show you how to create XSDs and how to define each element, attribute, and data type accepted by the schema when referred by any XML. So thanks for watching, and see you next lecture about our new topic, XSD. See you. Bye.